Chapter 1. Discovery and Betrayal. Jim Collins had always prided himself on his ability to read people. As the founder and CEO of a successful tech startup, he built his career on understanding motivations and anticipating moves. But as he stood in his home office, staring at the incriminating emails on his computer screen, he realized he had been blind to the most significant betrayal of his life. Linda, his wife of 15 years, had been having an affair with Mark Lavalier, a county permit officer. The emails were explicit, detailing not just their rendezvous, but also plans for a future together, plans that did not include Jim or their two daughters, Emma and Lisa. Jim felt a wave of nausea. The betrayal was a knife to the gut, twisting with every word he read. He closed his laptop and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had always thought they were a team, that their love was built on a solid foundation of trust and mutual respect. Clearly, he had been wrong. It was late, and the house was silent. Emma, 15, and Lisa, 12, were asleep in their rooms, unaware of the storm brewing downstairs. Jim knew he had to confront Linda, but he needed to do it in a way that protected his daughters. He couldn't afford to lose his composure. Jim walked to the kitchen, where he found Linda, glass of wine in hand, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Jim said, his voice steady but firm. Linda raised an eyebrow, taking another sip of her wine. "About what?" "About this," he replied, setting his laptop on the kitchen island and opening it to the emails. Linda's face paled as she scanned the screen. She set her glass down and met Jim's gaze. "Jim, I can explain, save it," Jim cut her off. "I don't want to hear any more lies. I just want to know why. Why, Linda?" She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "It just happened. Mark and I, we connected. It was exciting, something different. But it doesn't mean I don't love you." Jim felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat. "Love? This is how you show love? By betraying me and our family?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't mean for it to get this far, but it did," Jim said, his voice cold. "And now we have to deal with the consequences. I want you to pack a bag and leave tonight. We'll figure out the details later, but I can have you here right now." Linda opened her mouth to protest, but Jim held up a hand. "For once, just do what I ask." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face, and headed upstairs. Jim listened to the sounds of her moving around, his heart heavy with a mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and painful process, but for the sake of Emma and Lisa, he had to stay strong. He spent the rest of the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past few months in his mind. How had he missed the signs? Linda's late nights, her sudden interest in fitness, the secretive phone calls. It all made sense now, but it was too late. Morning came, and with it the sounds of his daughters getting ready for school. Jim forced himself to get up and put on a brave face. He had to be there for them, to make sure they knew they were loved and supported no matter what. "Morning, Dad," Emma said as she entered the kitchen. "You look tired." Jim managed a smile. "Just a rough night, sweetheart. How about some pancakes?" Lisa joined them, her eyes bright with excitement. "Yes, pancakes. Can we have chocolate chips?" "Sure thing," Jim said, grateful for the distraction. He poured batter onto the griddle, listening to his daughters chatter about school and friends. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget the turmoil and focus on the simple joy of being with his children. As they ate breakfast, Jim's phone buzzed with a text from David Adams, his best friend and confidant. "Heard about Linda. Call me when you can. Hang in there, buddy." Jim pocketed the phone, knowing he would need David's support in the days to come. But for now, he had to get through the morning, to put on a brave face for Emma and Lisa. After dropping the girls off at school, Jim sat in his car, staring at the building. He knew he couldn't go to work today. He needed to process everything, to figure out his next steps. He called David, who answered on the first ring. "Jim, I am so sorry, man," David said. "What do you need?" "Honestly, I don't even know where to start," Jim admitted. "I kicked her out last night. I need to figure out what to do next." "Come over to my place," David suggested. We can talk it through, make a plan. Jim agreed and headed to David S.'s house. As he drove, he felt a sense of determination growing. Linda S.'s betrayal had shattered his world, but he wasn't going to let it destroy him. He had 2 daughters who needed him, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. Arriving at David S.'s house, Jim was greeted with a hug and a strong cup of coffee. They sat on the back porch overlooking the city, and Jim poured out his heart. David listened, offering support and advice. "You need to talk to a lawyer," David said. "You need to protect your assets and make sure you get custody of the girls." Jim nodded. "I know. Do you know anyone good?" "I do," David replied. "Greg Harris. He is one of the best. I'll give you his number." Jim took the number, feeling a glimmer of hope. With David and Greg's help, he could navigate this nightmare and come out stronger on the other side. As he drove back home, Jim felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was going to fight for his daughters, for his future. Linda had made her choice, and now it was time for him to make his. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face it head-on. The betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it had also awakened a strength within him that he didn't know he possessed. He was determined to rebuild his life, for himself and for Emma and Lisa. The journey was just beginning, but Jim was ready to take the first step. Chapter 2. Strategic Moves. Jim Collins sat in his home office, the morning light streaming through the windows. The events of the previous night still weighed heavily on him, but he knew he couldn't afford to wallow in his emotions. He had to take action, to protect his daughters and his future. The first step was to contact Greg Harris, the attorney David had recommended. Picking up his phone, Jim dialed Greg's number. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Greg Harris speaking. Mr. Harris, this is Jim Collins. David Adams referred me to you. I need your help with a divorce." "Of course, Mr. Collins. I'm sorry to hear about your situation. Why don't you come by my office this afternoon? We can discuss the details and start planning your next steps." Jim agreed and noted the address. He spent the rest of the morning gathering documents, financial records, and anything that might be relevant to the case. He knew Linda would fight for a large portion of their assets, and he needed to be prepared. Arriving at Greg's office, Jim was greeted by a friendly receptionist and shown to a conference room. Moments later, Greg Harris entered, a tall man with sharp features and an air of confidence. "Jim, it's good to meet you," Greg said, shaking his hand. "David spoke highly of you. Let's get started, shall we?" Jim laid out the situation, explaining the affair, his decision to kick Linda out, and his concerns about custody and assets. Greg listened intently, taking notes. "First things first," Greg said. "We need to protect your assets and ensure you retain custody of your daughters. Since you were the primary breadwinner and your wife was unfaithful, we have a strong case. However, we need to act quickly." Jim nodded. "What do I need to do?" "Gather all financial records, including bank statements, investment accounts, and property deeds. We'll need to show the court a clear picture of your financial situation. Also, document everything related to the affair: emails, messages, anything that proves infidelity." Jim handed over the stack of documents he had brought. "I've got most of it here, and I've got copies of the emails." Greg reviewed the papers, nodding approvingly. "This is a good start. We'll also need to set up a meeting with Linda S.'s attorney to discuss custody arrangements. Our goal is to protect your daughters and ensure their well-being." Jim felt a surge of relief. Having a plan in place with a competent attorney on his side made the situation feel more manageable. "One more thing," Greg added. "Be careful with your actions and words around Linda. Anything you say or do can be used against you in court. Stay calm and collected, no matter how difficult it gets." Jim left Greg's office feeling more hopeful. He was determined to fight for his daughters and protect what he had built. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed support from his friends and family. That evening, Jim invited David over for dinner. As they sat on the patio, grilling steaks and sipping beer, Jim shared the details of his meeting with Greg. "Sounds like you are in good hands," David said, flipping the steaks. "Greg will take care of the legal side. What about the emotional side? Have you thought about talking to a therapist?" Jim shrugged. "I don't know. I've never been one for therapy. It might help, David said. You've been through a lot, and it might be good to have someone to talk to, someone who can help you process everything. Jim considered it. David had a point. He needed to be strong for Emma and Lisa, and taking care of his mental health was part of that. I'll think about it, Jim said. Right now, I just want to make sure the girls are okay. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Jim met with Greg again to finalize the paperwork and prepare for the custody hearing. He also took steps to secure his home and protect his daughter's privacy. He installed new locks, set up a security system, and made sure all financial accounts were secure. Linda, meanwhile, had moved in with a friend. She called several times, pleading for another chance, but Jim remained firm. He couldn't trust her anymore, and he needed to focus on his daughters. One afternoon, as Jim was working in his home office, the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Audrey Tanis, their neighbor, standing on the porch with a concerned expression. Jim, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry, Audrey said, giving him a sympathetic look. Thanks, Audrey, Jim replied. It's been tough, but we are getting through it. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. And if you ever need someone to talk to, I am here, Audrey offered. Jim appreciated the support. Thank you, Audrey, that means a lot. As Audrey left, Jim felt a sense of gratitude for the people around him. He knew he wasn't alone in this fight. That evening, as he sat with Emma and Lisa, helping them with their homework, Jim realized just how much he had to fight for. His daughters were his world, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. Hey, Dad, Emma said, looking up from her math book. Are we going to be okay? Jim smiled, ruffling her hair. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. With the support of his friends, his attorney, and his own determination, Jim would navigate this storm and come out stronger on the other side. He owed it to Emma and Lisa to be the best father he could be, no matter what. Chapter 3. The First Confrontation. Jim Collins felt a sense of resolve as he navigated the familiar streets of Maplewood, his hometown. The town had always been a place of comfort and stability, but now it seemed tinged with the tension and betrayal that had infiltrated his life. He parked his car in front of the modest, two-story house where he had lived with Linda and their daughters for over a decade. The house, once a symbol of their love and family unity, now felt like a battleground. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the silence that had become all too familiar. Emma and Lisa were at school, and Linda was supposed to be at her friend Audrey S.'s house. But as he moved through the hallway, he heard the unmistakable sound of voices coming from the living room. Jim's heart pounded as he approached, catching snippets of conversation. Linda S.'s voice, pleading and anxious, and another voice, a man S., calm and insistent. He stepped into the doorway, his presence immediately noticed by the two occupants. Linda and Mark Lavalier stood by the fireplace, their expressions shifting from surprise to discomfort as they saw him. Mark, tall and confident, had a smugness about him that made Jim's blood boil. Jim, what are you doing here? Linda asked, her voice trembling. I live here, Jim replied coldly, and I think it's time we had a real conversation. Mark crossed his arms, a slight smirk on his face. This isn't the time, Jim. Jim ignored him, focusing on Linda. I want to know why, Linda. Why you did this to our family, to our daughters. Linda looked away, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. Mark and I, we connected in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. And you thought it was worth destroying everything we built together? Jim's voice rose, the hurt and anger breaking through his calm exterior. Linda shook her head. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you or the girls. But you did, Jim said, his voice hardening. And now we have to deal with the consequences. Mark stepped forward, his expression serious. Look, Jim, this isn't helping anyone. Linda and I are together now, and you need to accept that. Jim turned to Mark, his eyes blazing. You think this is over? You think you can just walk in and take my family? It's not that simple. Linda stepped between them, her hands raised. Stop it, both of you. This isn't about fighting. It's about finding a way to move forward. Jim took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. You are right, this isn't about us. It is about Emma and Lisa. They deserve better than this. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I am willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Then you'll understand that I need full custody of the girls, Jim said firmly. They need stability, and I can provide that. Linda's face crumpled. But Jim, they are my daughters too. I can lose them. You should have thought of that before you had an affair, Jim snapped. I'll do everything in my power to protect them. Mark stepped forward again, his expression defiant. And what about Linda? She deserves a chance to be happy. Jim glared at him. Happiness doesn't come at the expense of others. If you really cared about her, you'd understand that. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unresolved emotions. Linda wiped her tears, looking between the two men. This isn't getting us anywhere. We need to talk to the lawyers, figure out a way to handle this without tearing each other apart. Jim nodded. Agreed. But make no mistake, I am fighting for my daughters, and I won to back down. Linda nodded, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. I understand. As Jim turned to leave, Mark called after him. This isn't over, Jim. Jim paused in the doorway, his voice steady. No, it is not, but I promise you, I want to let you win. He walked out of the house, the confrontation leaving him more determined than ever. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them. For Emma and Lisa, he would do whatever it took to protect their future. That evening, as Jim sat in his home office, he received a call from Greg Harris. Jim, I scheduled a meeting with Linda's attorney for tomorrow. We need to go over your priorities and strategies before then. Jim agreed and spent the next few hours preparing. He knew this meeting would set the tone for the legal battle ahead, and he needed to be ready. The next day, Jim met Greg at his office where they reviewed their plan. Greg was thorough, outlining the key points they would address: custody of the girls, division of assets, and securing Jim's business interests. As they entered the law firm representing Linda, Jim felt a surge of anxiety. He knew Linda would be there, along with her attorney. They were led to a conference room where Linda and her lawyer, Madison Collins, were already seated. Linda looked up as Jim entered, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. Madison, a sharp and professional woman, stood to greet them. Thank you all for coming, Madison said, her tone courteous but firm. Let's get started. Greg nodded, taking his seat. Our primary concern is the well-being of Emma and Lisa. Jim is requesting full custody to ensure their stability. Madison glanced at Linda, who nodded slightly. We understand that, but Linda also wants to remain a significant part of their lives. She is willing to share custody. Jim shook his head. They need stability, Madison. Moving back and forth between homes isn't what's best for them right now. Madison sighed. We can discuss a structured visitation schedule. Linda is committed to being there for her daughters. Greg leaned forward. We also need to address the financial arrangements. Jim has been the primary earner, and we need to ensure his business interests are protected. Linda's face tightened. I am not interested in taking his business. I just want to make sure the girls are taken care of. Jim felt a pang of relief. Despite everything, Linda was still prioritizing their daughter's needs. After hours of negotiation, they finally reached a tentative agreement. Jim would have primary custody, with Linda having scheduled visitations. The financial assets would be divided in a way that ensured the girls' needs were met, without jeopardizing Jim's business. As they left the law firm, Jim felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The first hurdle had been cleared, but he knew there were many more to come. Back at home, Jim spent the evening with Emma and Lisa, who were curious but understanding about the changes happening in their lives. He reassured them that everything would be okay and that they would always be loved and protected. As he tucked them into bed, Jim felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. For Emma and Lisa, he would stand strong, no matter the cost. Chapter 4. Unexpected Allies. The days following the legal meeting were a whirlwind for Jim Collins. While the preliminary agreement offered some relief, the reality of his new life was sinking in. He now had full responsibility for Emma and Lisa, and the looming legal proceedings required constant attention. But amidst the chaos, unexpected support arrived from an unlikely source. One afternoon, as Jim was working from his home office, he received a call from Audrey Tanis, their neighbor. Audrey had always been kind and considerate, but they had never been particularly close. Jim answered the call, curious about what she might need. "Jim, it's Audrey," she began, her voice warm. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all, Audrey," Jim replied. "What's up?" "Well, I heard about everything that's been going on," she said gently. "I wanted to offer my help if you need it. I know you're juggling a lot right now." Jim was touched by her offer. "Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that. It's been a lot to handle, but we are getting by." "I can imagine," Audrey said sympathetically. "If you ever need someone to watch the girls, run errands, or just talk, I am here. And well, there is something else. I've been through a similar situation and I thought you might benefit from hearing my story." Jim was intrigued. He had no idea Audrey had faced anything like what he was experiencing. "I'd like that. Maybe we could meet for coffee?" "That sounds perfect," Audrey agreed. "How about tomorrow morning at that little cafe on Maple Street?" They finalized the details, and Jim felt a sense of anticipation. Audrey's willingness to share her experiences was a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. There were others who had faced similar challenges and come out stronger on the other side. The next morning, Jim arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. He ordered a coffee and found a quiet corner table. Audrey arrived shortly after, her warm smile a comforting presence. They exchanged pleasantries before diving into the conversation. "Jim, I know it's not easy," Audrey began, stirring her tea, "but you have to focus on the positives. You're doing the best you can for Emma and Lisa, and that's what matters." Jim nodded, grateful for her support. "It's just hard, you know? I never imagined I'd be in this situation." Audrey nodded in understanding. "I know. When my ex-husband left me for another woman, I felt like my whole world was falling apart. But it got better, Jim. It took time, but it got better." Jim leaned forward, curious. "How did you manage?" Audrey took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. "I leaned on my friends and family. I saw a therapist, which helped a lot, and I focused on rebuilding my life, for myself and for my son. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." Jim appreciated her honesty. It is good to hear that it can get better. Right now, it just feels overwhelming. "It will get better," Audrey assured him. "Just take it one day at a time. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are people who care about you and want to help." Jim felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Audrey. Your support means a lot." They spent the next hour talking, sharing stories, and offering advice. Audrey's insight was invaluable, and Jim felt a renewed sense of hope. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but with the support of friends like Audrey, he could navigate it. As they left the cafe, Audrey gave him a reassuring hug. "Remember, Jim, you are stronger than you think, and if you ever need anything, just call." Jim smiled, feeling more confident. "Thanks, Audrey, I will." Over the next few weeks, Jim continued to juggle work, legal meetings, and parenting. He leaned on his support system, including David, Greg, and now Audrey. But another unexpected ally emerged, Colleen Hawkins, Mark Lavaliere's wife. Jim had never met Colleen, but he knew of her. She was a respected teacher at the local high school, and from what he'd heard, she was kind and hardworking. One evening, as Jim was preparing dinner, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello? Is this Jim Collins?" a woman's voice asked, hesitant. "Yes, it is. Who's calling?" "This is Colleen Hawkins," the woman replied, her voice calm but tense. "I am Mark Lavaliere's wife." Jim felt a jolt of surprise. "Colleen, hi. I wasn't expecting this." "I know," Colleen said, her tone softening. "I'm sorry to call you out of the blue. I wanted to talk to you if that's okay." Jim's curiosity was piqued. "Of course, what's on your mind?" There was a brief silence before Colleen continued. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that has happened. I know my husband is involved with Linda, and I know this must be incredibly difficult for you. It is difficult for me, too." Jim could hear the pain in her voice. "I'm sorry, Colleen. This whole situation is a mess." "It is," Colleen agreed. "But I don't want it to define our lives. I want to find a way to move forward for the sake of our families." Jim admired her strength. I understand. What are you thinking? Colleen took a deep breath. I want to meet. I think we could help each other. Maybe even find a way to resolve this in a way that minimizes the damage. Jim considered her proposal. It was unconventional, but it made sense. I think that's a good idea. When and where? They arranged to meet at a park near Colleen's house, a neutral location where they could talk openly. As Jim drove to the park the next day, he felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He didn't know what to expect, but he hoped for a constructive conversation. Colleen was waiting by a bench when he arrived. She was a petite woman with dark hair and a warm smile, though her eyes held a sadness that matched Jim's own. They exchanged polite greetings and sat down. Thank you for meeting me, Colleen began. I know this isn't easy. Jim nodded. No, it's not. But I appreciate you reaching out. Colleen looked out at the park, her expression thoughtful. I have been doing a lot of soul-searching lately. Mark and I have been having problems for a while, but I never imagined it would come to this. When I found out about the affair, I was devastated. Jim could relate. I know how you feel. It's like your whole world is turned upside down. Colleen nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Exactly. But I don't want to be defined by this. I want to find a way to move forward, to create a better future for myself and my children. Jim admired her resilience. I feel the same way. I am focused on protecting my daughters and making sure they have a stable environment. Colleen smiled faintly. I'm glad to hear that. I think we can help each other. If we work together, we can make sure our children are safe and supported, and we can hold Mark and Linda accountable for their actions. Jim agreed. You're right. We can't let them off the hook. But we also need to be careful, for the sake of our families. They spent the next hour discussing their options, sharing information, and planning their next steps. Colleen was smart and resourceful, and Jim appreciated her insight. Together they formed a plan to confront Mark and Linda, to demand accountability and ensure that their actions had consequences. As they parted ways, Colleen gave Jim a determined look. We are in this together, Jim. We'll get through it. Jim felt a sense of solidarity. Yes, we will. Thank you, Colleen. Driving home, Jim felt a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this fight. With allies like Audrey and Colleen, he had the support he needed to navigate the challenges ahead. For the sake of Emma and Lisa, and for his own peace of mind, he would fight for justice and a better future. The battle was far from over, but Jim was ready. He had the strength, the support, and the determination to see it through. And with each step forward, he knew he was moving closer to a new beginning, a life filled with hope and possibility. Chapter 5. Rising Tensions. The days turned into weeks, and Jim Collins found himself settling into a new routine. He juggled his responsibilities as a father, business owner, and legal combatant with a newfound determination. The support from Audrey Tanis and Colleen Hawkins had been invaluable, but he knew the real test was still to come. One morning, as Jim prepared breakfast for Emma and Lisa, the tension in the air was palpable. The girls were aware of the changes, and despite Jim's efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy, they sensed the underlying stress. Dad, are we going to see Mom today? Lisa asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jim paused, setting down the spatula. Yes, sweetheart. You'll see her this afternoon. Remember, it is important to stay positive and respectful, okay? Lisa nodded, but Emma remained silent, her brow furrowed. Jim placed a hand on her shoulder. How are you feeling, Em? Emma shrugged. It's just weird, you know? Everything is different now. Jim sighed, feeling the weight of her words. I know it is, but we're going to get through this together. No matter what happens, you and Lisa are my top priority. Emma managed a small smile. Okay, Dad. Later that day, Jim drove the girls to Linda's temporary residence. As they approached the house, Jim's heart pounded. He knew he had to maintain his composure for the girls' sake. Linda met them at the door, her expression strained but hopeful. Hi, girls, she greeted them, her voice overly bright. Emma and Lisa exchanged glances before stepping inside. Jim watched them go, then turned to Linda. Can we talk for a minute? Linda nodded, stepping outside onto the porch. What is on your mind? Jim took a deep breath. We need to make this work for the girls. They need stability and consistency, and we need to be on the same page. Linda nodded, her eyes downcast. I know. I've been thinking a lot about that. I want to make this right, Jim. Then let's start by setting clear boundaries and expectations, Jim said firmly. The girls need to know they are loved and supported by both of us, even if we are not together. Linda agreed, and they spent the next few minutes discussing a plan for co-parenting. Despite the lingering tension, Jim felt a glimmer of hope. They were making progress, however slow and painful it might be. As Jim drove back home, his phone buzzed with a text message from Colleen Hawkins. Meeting at my place tonight? I've got some new information to share. Jim replied affirmatively, feeling a surge of curiosity. Colleen had proven to be a valuable ally, and he was eager to hear what she had discovered. That evening, Jim arrived at Colleen S.'s house. She greeted him with a determined look and ushered him inside. They sat at the kitchen table, a stack of papers spread out before them. I've been doing some digging, Colleen began, her voice steady, and I found out some things about Mark that could be useful. Jim leaned forward, intrigued. What did you find? First, Mark's financial situation isn't as solid as he claims. He's been taking out loans and has some significant debts. If we can prove that he is financially unstable, it could help your case for custody. Jim felt a surge of hope. That is great news. What else? Colleen hesitated before continuing. I also found evidence that Mark S. been involved in some questionable activities at work. It's not concrete, but it's enough to raise suspicions. Jim S.'s mind raced with the possibilities. This could be a game changer. If we can discredit him, it strengthens our position. Colleen nodded. Exactly. But we need to be careful. This information is sensitive, and we need to handle it strategically. Jim agreed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They spent the next few hours devising a plan, discussing how to present the evidence and protect their interests. As Jim drove home, he felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The stakes were higher than ever, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Emma and Lisa, he would fight with everything he had. The next day, Jim met with Greg Harris to discuss the new information. Greg listened carefully, his expression serious. This is significant, Greg said, tapping his pen against the table. But we need to verify the details and present them carefully. If we play our cards right, it could have a major impact. Jim nodded. Colleen and I are on the same page. We are ready to do whatever it takes. Greg smiled. Good. Let's get to work. Over the following weeks, the tension continued to build. Jim and Colleen gathered more evidence, working tirelessly to strengthen their case. Meanwhile, the custody hearings loomed ever closer, adding to the pressure. One evening, as Jim was going over documents in his office, his phone rang. It was David Adams. Hey, Jim, David said, his voice upbeat. How are things going? Jim sighed. It's just been a roller coaster, David. But I think we're making progress. That is good to hear, David replied. I was thinking you need a break. How about a weekend getaway, just you and the girls? Clear your head, spend some quality time together. Jim considered the idea. That actually sounds great. I think we all could use a break. Perfect, David said. I've got a cabin upstate. It is quiet, peaceful, and the perfect place to unwind. You can head up this weekend if you'd like. Jim felt a wave of gratitude. Thanks, David. I'll take you up on that. The following weekend, Jim packed up the car and took Emma and Lisa to the cabin. As they drove through the scenic countryside, Jim felt a sense of relief. It was a much-needed escape from the stress and tension of their daily lives. The cabin was nestled in a wooded area, surrounded by nature. The girls were thrilled, exploring the area and enjoying the fresh air. They spent the weekend hiking, fishing, and playing games, their laughter a balm to Jim's weary soul. One evening, as they sat around a campfire, Emma turned to Jim. Dad, are we going to be okay? Jim looked into her eyes, filled with love and determination. Yes, Em, we're going to be just fine. We have each other, and that's what matters. Lisa snuggled up next to him, her eyes closing as she yawned. I love you, Dad. I love you too, Lisa, Jim said softly, wrapping his arms around his daughters. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. As the weekend came to a close, Jim felt rejuvenated. The break had been exactly what they needed. Driving back home, he felt more determined than ever to fight for his daughters and protect their future. Back in Maplewood, the custody hearings loomed closer. Jim and Colleen continued to gather evidence, working tirelessly to build their case. The tension was palpable, but Jim felt a renewed sense of strength. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, for the sake of Emma and Lisa. The day of the first hearing arrived, and Jim felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He met Greg at the courthouse, where they reviewed their strategy one last time. Linda and her attorney, Madison Collins, were already there, their expressions tense. As they entered the courtroom, Jim felt a surge of resolve. He was ready to fight for his daughters, to protect their future and ensure their well-being. The stakes were high, but he knew he had the strength and support to see it through. The hearing began, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Greg presented their case with precision, highlighting the evidence against Mark and emphasizing Jim's commitment to his daughters. Madison countered with arguments in Linda's favor, but the weight of the evidence was on Jim's side. As the proceedings continued, Jim felt a sense of hope. The judge listened intently, asking probing questions and considering the arguments carefully. It was clear that this would be a long and challenging battle, but Jim was ready for the fight. When the hearing finally adjourned, Jim felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The first hurdle had been cleared, but there were many more to come. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to fight for his daughters and protect their future. Leaving the courthouse, Jim felt a sense of determination. He had the support of his friends, the strength of his convictions, and the love of his daughters. With each step forward, he was moving closer to a new beginning, a future filled with hope and possibility. Chapter 6. Mid-story twist. The custody hearings were underway, and tensions were running high. Jim Collins felt the weight of each passing day, but he remained focused on his daughters, Emma and Lisa. The support from his allies, David, Audrey, and Colleen, was invaluable, but the fight was far from over. One evening, as Jim was reviewing documents in his home office, his phone rang. It was Greg Harris, his attorney. "Jim, we need to talk. I've got some important news." Jim felt a surge of anxiety. "What is it, Greg? Can you come to my office first thing tomorrow morning? It's better if we discuss this in person." Jim agreed, his mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, he arrived at Greg's office, where he was greeted with a serious expression. "Jim, I've been doing some digging and I've uncovered something significant," Greg began, motioning for Jim to sit down. "It turns out that Mark Lavalier has been involved in some illegal activities at his job. He's been accepting bribes and manipulating permits for personal gain." Jim's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That's huge." Greg nodded. "It is, and it gets better. I've got a contact in the county office who is willing to testify. This could be a game changer for our case." Jim felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This could discredit him completely. But what about Linda? How will this affect her? Greg leaned back in his chair, considering the question. It is hard to say. If Linda was aware of Mark's activities and didn't report them, it could reflect poorly on her. But if she was in the dark, it might not impact her directly. Jim nodded, processing the information. "We need to move quickly. How do we proceed? We'll need to gather all the evidence and prepare our witness. This will require careful coordination, but if we handle it right, it could significantly strengthen your position." Jim agreed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They spent the next few hours strategizing, outlining the steps needed to present their case effectively. Later that day, Jim met with Colleen Hawkins to share the news. They sat at her kitchen table, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "This is big, Colleen," Jim said, showing her the documents Greg had provided. "If we can prove Mark's involvement in these illegal activities, it could turn the tide in our favor." Colleen nodded, her expression determined. I had my suspicions about Mark, but I never imagined it was this serious. We need to make sure we have all our bases covered." They spent the afternoon reviewing the evidence, preparing for the next phase of their plan. The stakes were higher than ever, but Jim felt more confident with each passing day. As the next hearing approached, the tension was palpable. Jim and Greg arrived at the courthouse ready to present their findings. Linda and her attorney, Madison Collins, were already there, their expressions a mix of concern and defiance. The hearing began, and Greg wasted no time in presenting their new evidence. He called the county employee to the stand, who testified about Mark S. illegal activities in detail. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the revelations sinking in. Madison tried to counter the testimony, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When the hearing adjourned, Jim felt a surge of relief. They had made significant progress, but the fight was far from over. Outside the courthouse, Linda approached Jim, her face pale and drawn. "Jim, I had no idea about Mark S. activities. I swear I didn't know." Jim looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I believe you, Linda, but this doesn't change what has happened between us. We need to focus on what's best for the girls." Linda nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I am so sorry for everything." Jim felt a pang of sympathy but remained resolute. "We'll get through this, Linda, but we need to put the girls first." As they parted ways, Jim felt a renewed sense of determination. The battle was intensifying, but he was ready for whatever came next. That evening, as Jim sat with Emma and Lisa, he felt a sense of peace. Despite the turmoil, they were a family, and that was what mattered most. The next day, Jim received a call from Audrey Tanis. "Jim, I heard about the hearing. How are you holding up?" Jim sighed, grateful for her concern. "It's been tough, Audrey, but we made some significant progress today." "How are you?" "I am good," Audrey replied. "I wanted to see if you and the girls would like to come over for dinner this weekend. It might be a good distraction." Jim smiled. "That sounds great. We'd love to." Saturday evening, Jim and the girls arrived at Audrey S. house. The warm, inviting atmosphere was a welcome respite from the tension of the hearings. Audrey had prepared a delicious meal, and the conversation flowed easily. As they sat around the table, Emma and Lisa laughed and chatted with Audrey, their spirits lifted. Jim felt a sense of gratitude for the support and friendship that had helped them through these difficult times. After dinner, Audrey and Jim sat on the porch watching the girls play in the yard. "Thank you for this, Audrey," Jim said, his voice sincere. "It means a lot." Audrey smiled, her eyes warm. "You are welcome, Jim. We are all in this together, and you are doing an amazing job." Jim felt a surge of hope. With friends like Audrey and Colleen by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The weeks passed, and the final custody hearing loomed closer. Jim and Greg worked tirelessly, preparing their case and gathering additional evidence. The tension was high, but Jim remained focused on his goal, protecting his daughters and ensuring their future. The day of the final hearing arrived, and Jim felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He met Greg at the courthouse, where they reviewed their strategy one last time. Linda and Madison were already there, their expressions tense but composed. As the hearing began, Greg presented their case with precision and clarity. The evidence against Mark was overwhelming, and the testimony from the county employee had a significant impact. Madison did her best to counter their arguments, but it was clear that the tide had turned. The judge listened carefully, her expression thoughtful and serious. When the hearing finally concluded, Jim felt a sense of relief and anticipation. The judge would take some time to deliberate, but Jim felt confident in their position. Outside the courthouse, Jim and Greg exchanged a handshake. "You did great, Jim," Greg said. "I think we've got a strong case." Jim nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Greg. I couldn't have done it without you." As they left the courthouse, Jim felt a renewed sense of hope. The battle was far from over, but he knew he had the strength and support to see it through. That evening, as Jim sat with Emma and Lisa, he felt a sense of peace. They had faced incredible challenges, but they had done it together. And no matter what the future held, They would continue to face it as a family. The next few days were filled with anticipation as they awaited the Judge's decision. Jim focused on his work and spent quality time with his daughters, trying to keep their spirits high. One afternoon, as Jim was working in his home office, his phone rang. It was Greg. "Jim, we've got the Judge's decision. Can you come to my office?" Jim felt a surge of anxiety. "I'll be there right away." Arriving at Greg's office, Jim was greeted with a serious expression. They sat down, and Greg handed him a document. "The judge has ruled in your favor, Jim. You have full custody of Emma and Lisa." Jim felt a wave of relief and emotion. "Thank you, Greg. This means everything to me." Greg smiled. "You did it, Jim. You fought for your daughters and you won." Jim left the office, his heart filled with gratitude and hope. The battle had been long and difficult, but they had come out stronger on the other side. As he arrived home, Emma and Lisa greeted him with excited smiles. "Dad, what did the judge say?" Jim knelt down, wrapping his arms around them. "We won, girls. We're going to be okay." The girls hugged him tightly, their joy palpable. In that moment, Jim knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner, their laughter and joy filling the house. Jim felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. They had faced incredible challenges, but they had done it together. And no matter what the future held, they would continue to face it as a family. The journey was far from over, but with each step forward, they were moving closer to a new beginning, a future filled with hope and possibility. Chapter 7. Action and Intrigue. With the custody battle resolved in his favor, Jim Collins finally felt a sense of relief. But the aftermath of the ordeal left a web of complexities to untangle. He had secured his daughter's future, but the legal and emotional fallout continued to cast long shadows. One evening, as Jim sat in his living room, his phone buzzed with a message from Colleen Hawkins. "Can we meet? There's something important I need to discuss." Intrigued and slightly concerned, Jim agreed to meet her at a quiet coffee shop downtown. When he arrived, Colleen was already seated, her face etched with worry. "Jim, thanks for coming," Colleen said, gesturing for him to sit. "I've discovered something else about Mark." Jim leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Colleen lowered her voice, glancing around to ensure they weren't too overheard. "I found out that Mark is planning to flee the country. He is liquidating his assets and trying to disappear." Jim's eyes widened in shock. "Are you serious? How did you find this out?" "A friend of mine works at the bank where Mark has his accounts. She overheard him making arrangements to transfer a large sum of money offshore. He's trying to cover his tracks." Jim felt a surge of anger and determination. "We can let him get away with this. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." Colleen nodded. "I agree, but we need to act quickly. If he disappears, it will be much harder to bring him to justice." They spent the next hour devising a plan. Jim contacted Greg Harris, who immediately started working on securing a court order to freeze Mark's assets and prevent him from leaving the country. As they waited for Greg's updates, Jim and Colleen kept a close watch on Mark's activities. They enlisted the help of Audrey Tanis, who had a network of contacts that could provide valuable information. The tension mounted as they tracked Mark's movements. One afternoon, Jim received a call from Audrey. "Jim, I've got some news. Mark's booked a flight to a non-extradition country. He's planning to leave tonight." Jim's heart pounded. "We need to stop him. I'll call Greg." Greg acted swiftly, obtaining the necessary court orders. They alerted the authorities and headed to the airport, hoping to intercept Mark before he could board his flight. As Jim and Colleen arrived at the airport, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. They scanned the crowded terminal, searching for Mark. Suddenly, Colleen spotted him near the check-in counter. "There he is," she whispered urgently. Jim's pulse quickened as they approached. Mark noticed them and tried to slip away, but Jim blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere, Mark." Mark's eyes narrowed, a look of desperation flashing across his face. "What are you talking about?" Jim held up the court order. You are under investigation for illegal activities, and your assets have been frozen. You're not leaving this country." Mark S.'s expression shifted from anger to panic. "You can't do this. I have rights." Colleen stepped forward, her voice steady. "You have the right to face the consequences of your actions. Running away won't solve anything." The authorities arrived moments later, taking Mark into custody. Jim watched as they led him away, a mixture of relief and satisfaction washing over him. They had stopped him from escaping justice, but the battle was far from over. Back at home, Jim received a call from Greg. "Great work today, Jim. Mark's arrest will strengthen our case against him, but we need to stay vigilant." Jim agreed, knowing there were still challenges ahead. He spent the evening with Emma and Lisa, their presence a comforting reminder of what he was fighting for. As the weeks passed, the investigation into Mark's activities deepened. Jim and Colleen continued to work closely with Greg, gathering evidence and preparing for the upcoming legal proceedings. One afternoon, as Jim was working in his office, his phone rang. It was David Adams. "Jim, I've got some news. I've been doing some digging, and I found something interesting about Linda." Jim's curiosity was piqued. "What did you find?" "It turns out that Linda has been in contact with an old friend, someone who might be able to help us," David explained. "Her name is Anna Thompson. She is a private investigator, and she has experience dealing with cases like ours." Jim felt a surge of hope. "That's great news. Do you think she'd be willing to help us?" David chuckled. "I already talked to her. She is interested in meeting you and discussing how she can assist." Jim arranged to meet Anna the following day. As he arrived at the designated cafe, he spotted a woman in her early 30s with an air of confidence and professionalism. She greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Jim, it is a pleasure to meet you," Anna said, her voice steady. "David has told me a lot about your situation. I believe I can help." Jim felt a sense of relief. "Thank you, Anna. We need all the help we can get." They spent the next hour discussing the case, with Anna offering valuable insights and strategies. Her experience and expertise were evident, and Jim felt more hopeful than he had in weeks. As they wrapped up the meeting, Anna handed Jim her card. "I'll start looking into Mark's activities right away. If there's anything else you need, don't hesitate to call." Jim thanked her and left the cafe, feeling a renewed sense of determination. With Anna's help, they had a better chance of uncovering the full extent of Mark's crimes and ensuring that he faced justice. In the following weeks, Anna's investigation yielded significant results. She uncovered evidence of Mark's involvement in a wider network of illegal activities, including fraud and embezzlement. The scope of his crimes was staggering, and the new information bolstered their case. The day of the trial finally arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Jim, Colleen, Greg, and Anna sat together, ready to present their findings. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable. As the trial unfolded, Greg presented the evidence with precision and clarity. Anna's testimony was particularly impactful, providing detailed insights into Mark's illegal activities. The judge listened intently, the weight of the evidence impossible to ignore. Mark's defense tried to counter the arguments, but their efforts were futile. The evidence was overwhelming, and it became clear that Mark had orchestrated a complex web of deceit. When the trial concluded, the judge delivered a decisive verdict. Mark was found guilty on multiple counts, and he faced a lengthy prison sentence. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Outside the courthouse, Jim and his allies exchanged hugs and handshakes. They had fought tirelessly for justice, and their efforts had paid off. "Thank you, Anna," Jim said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you." Anna smiled warmly. "It was a team effort, Jim. You fought for your family, and that's what matters." As they parted ways, Jim felt a sense of closure. The battle had been long and arduous, but they had prevailed. He had protected his daughters and ensured that justice was served. Back at home, Jim celebrated with Emma and Lisa. They laughed and talked, their spirits lifted by the victory. Jim felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that they had overcome incredible challenges together. The journey was far from over, but with each step forward, they were moving closer to a new beginning, a future filled with hope and possibility. That evening, as Jim tucked Emma and Lisa into bed, he felt a profound sense of peace. "I love you, girls. We're going to be just fine." Emma smiled sleepily. "We love you too, Dad." Lisa nodded, her eyes closing. "Good night, Dad." Jim watched them for a moment, his heart swelling with love and pride. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. They were a family, and that was what mattered most. The next morning, Jim woke up with a sense of purpose. He had faced incredible challenges and come out stronger. With the support of his friends and the love of his daughters, he was ready to embrace the future. As he sat on the porch, sipping his coffee and watching the sunrise, Jim felt a sense of hope and possibility. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. He was ready to move forward, to create a new life filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities. The future was bright, and Jim was ready to face it head-on, for Emma and Lisa, for himself, and for the promise of a better tomorrow. Chapter 8. Final Showdown. The victory over Mark Lavalier in court brought a wave of relief to Jim Collins, but he knew the final showdown with Linda was still ahead. The legal battles had taken their toll on everyone involved, and the emotional wounds were still fresh. One afternoon, as Jim was working in his home office, he received a call from Greg Harris. "Jim, we need to talk. Linda S. attorney has requested a meeting." Jim felt a knot form in his stomach. "What is it about?" "She wants to discuss a settlement," Greg explained. "It seems they are willing to negotiate terms to avoid a prolonged court battle." Jim agreed to the meeting, feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. The next day, he met Greg at the law firm representing Linda. The atmosphere was tense as they entered the conference room where Linda and her attorney, Madison Collins, were waiting. Linda looked up as Jim entered, her expression a blend of guilt and defiance. Madison greeted them with a professional nod. "Thank you for coming. Let us get started." Greg began by outlining their position, emphasizing the need for a fair settlement that prioritized the well-being of Emma and Lisa. Madison listened carefully, then presented their proposal. "We are willing to concede full custody to Jim," Madison began, "but Linda wants reasonable visitation rights and a fair division of assets." Jim felt a surge of relief at the concession of full custody, but remained cautious. "Visitation is fine, as long as it doesn't disrupt the girls' routine, and the division of assets needs to be equitable." The negotiation was intense, with both sides presenting their demands and compromises. The discussion stretched on for hours, each point carefully debated and scrutinized. Finally, they reached an agreement that both sides could accept. Linda looked at Jim, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I have made a lot of mistakes, Jim, but I want to do what's right for the girls. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Jim felt a pang of sympathy, but remained firm. "I appreciate that, Linda. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We need to move forward for Emma and Lisa's sake." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." As they left the law firm, Jim felt a sense of closure. The legal battles were coming to an end, and he could finally focus on rebuilding his life. Back at home, Jim shared the news with Emma and Lisa. They were relieved and happy, eager to move on from the turmoil that had engulfed their lives. "Are we really done with all the court stuff, Dad?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with hope. Jim smiled, hugging her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart, we are done. We can finally start moving forward." The following weeks were a time of healing and new beginnings. Jim focused on his work and spent quality time with his daughters. They enjoyed simple pleasures, movie nights, picnics in the park, and lazy afternoons at home. One evening, as Jim was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Colleen Hawkins standing there, a warm smile on her face. "Colleen, what a nice surprise." "Come in," Jim said, stepping aside to let her in. "Thanks, Jim," Colleen replied, entering the house. "I just wanted to check in and see how you were doing." Jim appreciated her concern. "We are doing well, thanks to you and everyone else who helped us through this." Colleen smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve some peace after everything you've been through." They sat in the living room chatting and catching up. Colleen shared updates about her life, and Jim felt a sense of camaraderie and gratitude. The support from Colleen, Audrey, and Anna had been instrumental in navigating the challenges they faced. As the evening progressed, Jim felt a growing connection with Colleen. Their shared experiences had forged a bond that went beyond friendship. He found himself looking forward to their conversations and the comfort of her presence. One weekend, Jim and the girls were invited to a barbecue at Audrey S. house. It was a beautiful day, filled with laughter, delicious food, and good company. Audrey S. backyard was bustling with activity as friends and neighbors gathered to enjoy the event. Jim watched as Emma and Lisa played with the other children, their laughter ringing out in the warm summer air. He felt a sense of contentment and peace. They had come so far and the future looked bright. As the sun began to set, Jim found himself standing by the grill, flipping burgers and chatting with David Adams. "This is nice," Jim said, smiling. "It feels like things are finally getting back to normal." David nodded. "You've been through a lot, Jim. It's good to see you smiling again." Jim glanced over at Colleen, who was talking with Audrey and some of the other guests. Their eyes met, and she smiled warmly. Jim felt a flutter of emotion, realizing how much she had come to mean to him. Later that evening, as the barbecue wound down, Jim and Colleen found a quiet spot in the garden. They sat on a bench, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. "Colleen, I just want to thank you for everything," Jim said, his voice sincere. "I couldn't have done this without your support." Colleen reached out and took his hand. "We helped each other, Jim. You are stronger than you know, and you have done an amazing job with Emma and Lisa." Jim felt a surge of emotion. "I couldn't have asked for better friends. And, well, I've come to realize that you mean a lot to me, Colleen." Colleen's eyes sparkled with warmth. "You mean a lot to me too, Jim." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the connection between them growing stronger. Jim felt a sense of hope and possibility. The future was bright, and he was ready to embrace it. The next few months were filled with new beginnings and joyful moments. Jim and Colleen's relationship blossomed, bringing happiness and stability to their lives. Emma and Lisa thrived, their laughter and smiles a constant source of joy. Jim continued to build his business, finding fulfillment in his work and the support of his community. The challenges they had faced had made them stronger, and Jim felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had traveled. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Jim looked at Colleen and the girls, his heart swelling with love and pride. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." Emma smiled, wrapping her arms around him. "We love you, Dad." Lisa nodded, her eyes shining. "We are a team, and we always will be." Colleen took Jim's hand, her gaze steady and loving. "We are in this together, Jim, and we always will be." Jim felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had come out stronger on the other side. They were a family, bound by love and resilience. As they watched the sunset, Jim felt a profound sense of hope and possibility. The future was bright, and they were ready to embrace it together. The final showdown had brought closure and new beginnings. They had faced incredible challenges, but they had done it together. And no matter what the future held, they knew they could face it with strength, love, and unwavering support. The journey was far from over, but with each step forward, they were moving closer to a new beginning, a future filled with hope and endless possibilities. Chapter 9. Resolution. The final showdown had concluded, and Jim Collins felt the weight of the past months lifting. He had secured custody of his daughters, brought Mark to justice, and found a supportive community. But as the dust settled, Jim knew there were still pieces to pick up and new paths to forge. One crisp autumn morning, Jim received a call from Anna Thompson, the private investigator who had been instrumental in their case against Mark. "Jim, can we meet? There is something I'd like to discuss with you. Jim agreed, meeting Anna at a quiet park. As they walked along the tree-lined paths, Anna spoke. Jim, I've been thinking a lot about your situation. You've come a long way, but there's one more thing we need to address. Jim looked at her, curious. What is it? Linda's involvement in Mark's activities, Anna said, her voice steady. While it's clear she didn't know everything, there are still unanswered questions. We need to ensure she is not implicated in any future investigations. Jim felt a pang of concern. I don't want anything else to disrupt the girls' lives. What do you suggest? Anna smiled reassuringly. We need to conduct a thorough review of her interactions with Mark and document everything. It's about closing any remaining gaps and ensuring complete transparency. Jim nodded. I understand. Let us do it. Over the next few weeks, Anna worked diligently, reviewing documents and interviewing individuals who had interacted with Linda and Mark. The process was thorough, and while it uncovered a few minor discrepancies, nothing indicated that Linda had knowingly participated in Mark's illegal activities. Jim felt a sense of relief. The final piece of the puzzle was falling into place, and he could now focus entirely on the future. He thanked Anna for her dedication and thoroughness, knowing that her work had been crucial to their success. With the legal matters finally behind them, Jim turned his attention to his daughters and their future. He wanted to create a sense of stability and normalcy for Emma and Lisa, ensuring they felt loved and supported. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Jim brought up the topic of family traditions. I've been thinking, girls, how about we start some new traditions? Something we can look forward to every year. Emma's eyes lit up. Like what, Dad? Jim smiled. How about an annual camping trip? Just the three of us, exploring new places and making memories. Lisa clapped her hands excitedly. Yes, that sounds amazing. They spent the evening planning their first trip, mapping out destinations and activities. The excitement was palpable, and Jim felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing they were building something special. As the weeks passed, their lives began to settle into a comfortable rhythm. Jim's relationship with Colleen continued to grow, bringing joy and companionship into his life. They enjoyed quiet evenings together, sharing stories and dreams for the future. One sunny afternoon, Jim and Colleen took Emma and Lisa to a local fair. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and the enticing aroma of fair food. They rode the Ferris wheel, played games, and indulged in cotton candy. As they walked through the fairgrounds, Emma spotted a face painting booth. Dad, can we get our faces painted? Jim chuckled. Why not? Let's do it. They all took turns, emerging with colorful designs on their faces. Jim S. was a roaring lion, Colleen S. a delicate butterfly, Emma S. a fierce tiger, and Lisa S. a sparkling unicorn. They laughed at each other's designs, capturing the moment with photos. That evening, as they sat around a bonfire in the backyard, Jim reflected on how far they had come. The journey had been filled with challenges, but they had emerged stronger and closer as a family. Thank you for everything, Colleen, Jim said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've been a rock for us. Colleen smiled, her eyes warm. We've all been there for each other, Jim. That is what family is about. Emma and Lisa snuggled up next to them, their faces glowing in the firelight. We are happy, Dad, Emma said softly. Really happy. Jim felt a surge of emotion. I am happy too, sweetheart, and I promise I'll always be here for you. As the stars twinkled above them, Jim knew they were on the right path. The past had tested them, but the future was filled with hope and endless possibilities. The next few months were a time of growth and renewal. Jim continued to build his business, finding new opportunities and challenges that invigorated him. His relationship with Colleen deepened, and they began to talk about their future together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Colleen turned to Jim. I've been thinking, Jim. What do you see for our future? Jim smiled, taking her hand. I see us building a life together, filled with love and adventure. I see us supporting each other through every challenge and celebrating every victory. Colleen's eyes sparkled with tears. I see that too, Jim. I love you. I love you too, Colleen, Jim replied, his voice filled with emotion. I can imagine my life without you. They shared a tender kiss, sealing their commitment to each other. The future was bright, and they were ready to embrace it together. As the seasons changed, Jim and Colleen continued to nurture their relationship, blending their lives and creating new traditions. They took Emma and Lisa on their first camping trip, exploring the beauty of nature and making memories that would last a lifetime. Around the campfire, they shared stories and dreams, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. Jim felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing they were building a future filled with love and joy. One day, Jim received an unexpected visit from Audrey Tanis. She arrived at his house, a broad smile on her face. "Jim, I've got some exciting news." Jim welcomed her in, curious. "What's up, Audrey? I've decided to start a community support group for people going through similar situations," Audrey explained. "It will be a place where they can find support, share their stories, and get the help they need." Jim was impressed. "That's an incredible idea, Audrey. How can I help?" "Well, I was hoping you'd be willing to share your story," Audrey said. "Your journey has been inspiring, and I think it would help others to hear it." Jim felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "I'd be honored, Audrey. Count me in." Over the next few months, Audrey's support group flourished. Jim shared his experiences, offering hope and guidance to those facing their own challenges. It was a rewarding experience, and he felt a deep sense of purpose in helping others. As the year drew to a close, Jim reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled. The challenges they had faced had been immense, but they had come out stronger on the other side. They were a family, bound by love and resilience, ready to embrace the future together. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Emma turned to Jim. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Jim smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "Yes, sweetheart. We are going to be more than okay. We are going to thrive." Lisa nodded, her eyes shining with confidence. "We are a team, and we always will be." Colleen took Jim's hand, her gaze filled with love and determination. "We are in this together, Jim, and we always will be." As they watched the fire flicker and dance, Jim felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had emerged stronger and closer as a family. The future was bright, and they were ready to face it with hope and endless possibilities. The resolution of their challenges had brought them closer together, forging bonds that would last a lifetime. They were a family, ready to embrace the future and all the adventures it held. The journey was far from over, but with each step forward they were moving closer to a new beginning, a future filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities. Chapter 10. New Beginnings. With the dust of the past finally settling, Jim Collins stood on the precipice of a new chapter in his life. The battles they had faced had forged them into a stronger family, and now it was time to focus on building a future filled with love and joy. One bright spring morning, Jim woke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. He stretched, feeling a sense of peace and anticipation. Today was a special day, a day to celebrate new beginnings. As he prepared breakfast, Emma and Lisa bounded into the kitchen, their faces alight with excitement. "Good morning, Dad," they chimed in unison. "Good morning, girls," Jim replied, smiling. "Ready for our big day?" They nodded eagerly, their enthusiasm contagious. Today they were moving into a new home, a place that symbolized their fresh start. Jim had found a charming house on the outskirts of Maplewood, surrounded by nature and filled with light. It was the perfect place to create new memories and build their future. As they drove to the new house, Jim felt a mixture of nostalgia and excitement. The journey they had traveled had been long and difficult, but it had brought them to this moment, a moment of hope and possibility. Arriving at the house, they were greeted by Colleen Hawkins, who had come to help with the move. Her warm smile and supportive presence were a constant source of comfort for Jim. "Welcome to your new home," Colleen exclaimed, hugging Emma and Lisa. "Thanks, Colleen," Lisa said, her eyes sparkling. "We were so excited." They spent the day unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and exploring the house. The girls chose their bedrooms, decorating them with posters, fairy lights, and personal touches. The house quickly began to feel like home, filled with laughter and joy. That evening, as they sat around the dining table enjoying their first meal in the new house, Jim felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had come so far, and the future was bright. "How about we make a toast?" Jim suggested, raising his glass of sparkling cider. "To new beginnings," Emma said, her eyes shining. "To our new home," Lisa added, clinking her glass against her sister S. "To family," Colleen said softly, her gaze meeting Jim S. "To family," Jim echoed, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The next few months were filled with new adventures and joyful moments. Jim continued to build his business, finding success and satisfaction in his work. Colleen became an integral part of their lives, her love and support enriching their days. One weekend, Jim and Colleen took Emma and Lisa on a hiking trip to the nearby mountains. The trail was challenging, but the breathtaking views and shared experience brought them closer together. As they reached the summit, they stood together, taking in the panoramic view of the valley below. The wind whispered through the trees, and Jim felt a deep sense of peace. "This is amazing, Dad," Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. "It really is," Jim replied, wrapping an arm around her. "I am so proud of you girls. You've been through so much and you've come out stronger." Lisa smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "We couldn't have done it without you, Dad. And we couldn't have done it without Colleen," Emma added, looking at her with gratitude. Colleen's eyes glistened with emotion. "We are a team, and we always will be." As they stood together, Jim felt a sense of unity and purpose. They had faced incredible challenges, but they had emerged stronger and closer. The future was bright, and they were ready to embrace it together. Back at home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They enjoyed simple pleasures, movie nights, family dinners, and weekend outings. Jim felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing they were building a future filled with love and joy. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jim turned to Colleen. "I've been thinking a lot about our future, Colleen. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Colleen's eyes sparkled with tears. "I love you too, Jim. I can imagine my life without you." Jim reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Colleen, will you marry me?" Colleen gasped, her eyes widening with surprise and joy. "Yes, Jim! Yes, I will!" They embraced, their hearts overflowing with love and happiness. Emma and Lisa, who had been watching from the doorway, ran over to join the celebration. "We were so happy for you," Emma exclaimed, hugging them tightly. "Congratulations," Lisa added, her eyes shining with excitement. The months that followed were filled with preparations for the wedding. It was a joyous time, filled with laughter, love, and anticipation. Friends and family came together to celebrate their union, and the house was filled with warmth and happiness. The wedding day arrived, and it was a beautiful, sunny day. They held the ceremony in their backyard, surrounded by flowers and twinkling lights. Jim and Colleen exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives. As they stood together, hand in hand, Jim felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had come so far, and they were ready to face the future together. The reception was a joyful celebration, filled with music, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Friends and family shared their love and best wishes, and the air was filled with laughter and joy. As the evening drew to a close, Jim and Colleen stood together, watching the stars twinkle above. "This is the beginning of a beautiful journey," Jim said, his voice filled with emotion. Colleen nodded, her eyes shining with love. "We have each other, and that's all we need." Emma and Lisa joined them, their faces glowing with happiness. "We are a family, and we always will be," Emma said softly. Lisa nodded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Together, we can face anything." Jim felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had emerged stronger and closer as a family. The future was bright, and they were ready to embrace it with love and joy. As they stood together, watching the stars, Jim knew that their new beginning was just the start of a beautiful journey. They had faced incredible challenges, but they had come out stronger on the other side, and no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family. The journey was far from over, but with each step forward, they were moving closer to a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. Together, they were ready to embrace the adventures and joys that lay ahead, knowing that they could face anything as long as they had each other. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to my channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story and what stories you want to hear.